This program is sponsored in part by the National Catholic Society of Foresters. Hello and welcome to Looking at Social Justice. I'm Jim Grant, and it's my privilege to be having a very special guest today, Bishop David C. Rice, the Bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, who will be sharing with us something very important not only for the Diocese of San Joaquin, which is the Pilgrimage of Hope, but also to share with us something about the community and the work that they're doing right here in Fresno when they're not doing what they're doing on this special trip from Fresno to Sacramento, May 4th to May 20th. Bishop Rice, it's a pleasure to think you'll be here at the installation for our bishop on May 2nd, for Bishop Brennan, but also to know that there is a presence of the Episcopal Diocese very, very important to our diocese. We partner with Faith in the Valley. You host them at the Cathedral of St. James. Could you tell us a little bit about yourself and the Cathedral and the Diocese of San Joaquin as we begin our conversation about the pilgrimage?
Thank you, Jim. Kia ora and morena. So those words are words of welcome, and I've said good morning to you. From the tongue of the Tangata Whenua, the Māori people of New Zealand, from whence we have come. So again, good morning and greetings to you and to our Roman Catholic sisters and brothers. We arrived from Aotearoa, New Zealand 5 years ago. And so I've been diocesan bishop of the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin since early 2014. Our diocese, Jim, as you know, goes north to Lodi, San Andreas, south to Taft, goes to the Nevada border, and about as far as the eye can possibly see to the west. So it's an expansive territory. The other thing to say about this place I've inherited and for which I have responsibility, it is a diocese that has been in litigation for 10 years. A split occurred 10 years ago, and so we've been living the litigious life, if you will. And the other thing I need to hasten to insert before we talk about what is before us and relationships is that for all intents and purposes, 2 decades prior to that split, there was a preoccupation in this diocese for, how shall I say, being at odds with the church of which it was a part. And so this has been a diocese for all intents and purposes that has been in isolation for about 3 decades.
Wow.
The reason I'm saying that to set the table for us is that virtually everything we've done over the last 5 years we've done for the first time.
Wow.
Particularly those expressions of missiology, joining God in the neighborhood with what God is already doing, and being a church beyond the walls. So you've mentioned Faith in the Valley. Part of what we've endeavored to do over the last 5 years is to broker relationships with institutions and affiliates and partners and friends who are doing what we think is sacred work. And sometimes those are ecclesiastical groups, sometimes they're not, but they're groups that are doing, I think, wonderful social justice work. And I think that's godly work, as does my diocese. So Faith in the Valley, about whom you spoke, we share space with them at our cathedral. By the way, our cathedral came back to us about 3 years ago, also through litigation. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to make space for Faith in the Valley as quickly as possible, because we wanted to join with them in their extraordinary work. And Jim, there's not been a day of regret. One, having them in that shared space, and two, sharing this, again, this godly work with them. And so part of that, as it's emerged, as it was in 2015, you may recall, we did a bicycle tour throughout the diocese called the Tour Against Trafficking, raising awareness concerning labor and sex trafficking, which is alive and unwell throughout this valley and the High Sierras, namely in our context, the Diocese of San Joaquin, and to support those agencies up and down the valley working with survivors of trafficking. So it was an enormous piece of work that was about educating and informing ourselves, and also doing that outward and visible work to endeavor to make a difference. This pilgrimage of hope, which is called a hikoi, that's another Māori word, the indigenous people of New Zealand, is an intentional movement with a purpose. Namely, it's a walkabout. And so we're going to go walking for 16 days from our see here in Fresno, from our cathedral, on the 4th of May, and conclude in Sacramento at the Capitol on the 20th of May. The 20th of May, as you may know, is statewide the Day of the Immigrant. And so the impetus and intentionality behind this hikoi, this pilgrimage, is to raise awareness regarding the plight of our immigrant and refugee sisters and brothers, to raise money for legal defense funds where that's required, to create an optic that we believe is everything to do with what it means to be the church in the 21st century. And then lastly, with equal importance, to engage, once we're in Sacramento, with legislators and lawmakers regarding what we think is a dysfunctional, broken system.
It is wonderful to think that our diocese, the Roman Catholic Diocese of Fresno, will be on one of those nights while you're walking along in Chowchilla at St. Columba, that parish has been asked to and reciprocated by being a hosting parish. Father Angel Sotelo and the community of St. Columba are so glad to be a small part of what's a major event.
Indeed.
Now, one thing that I received from Canon Anna were 7 questions that might give us a really clear path. First one, she says, for 10 years now, your diocese and the Episcopal community has been looking at missional ministry. So the first question is, how would you like to locate this mission of immigration reform in this missional ministry commitment that you've adopted, just as we have with Pope Francis with this missionary discipleship call? We seem to be on the same page.
Indeed, I'm sure we are. By the way, you can say to my canon, Jim, that she poses lovely queries.
She's awesome. Canon Anna is awesome.
She's good value.
Deacon Nancy, awesome.
Listen,
and your dean,
yeah, we have some
Newman,
rock stars. We have some rock stars
wonderful
in place.
staff.
Yeah,
A wonderful
thanks be to God. So I need to back up for a moment because these narratives which provide the backdrop from which we come over the last 5 years obviously inform where we are now. So I'll talk about missiology in a moment. Jim, about 4.5 years ago, during my Sunday visitations, I would pose the query to well-meaning, well-intended Episcopalians, tell me about people who live on the streets in our valley, namely our diocese. Now, Jim, wait for it. You won't be surprised by the responses. Oftentimes, more often than not, the response was, we don't have anybody who lives on the streets, or we don't know them. And so we did significant educative formational work for a year at least in having conversations, intentional conversations about the increased number of people who do in fact live on the streets up and down this valley in the High Sierras. And so what we did, I don't know if you know those little string backpacks you see young people, perhaps over the school you see them. So in the last 5 years, we've bought 10,000 of those. And we've given them to each of our faith communities. And we've said to them, find someone who's living on the streets. You don't have to look very far. Engage them in a conversation. And it may be the very first time you've had a conversation with someone who lives on the streets. And then ask them what you can do for them. And based on their story and what they hear, think about what you can put in that backpack. And then carry those backpacks around and make them available to people who live on the streets. Now, Jim, this is typically low-hanging fruit. This is such a simple thing, such a simple thing. And then the second thing we did, because Episcopalians aren't very good about talking about what we're doing and how we reflect Jesus, is I invited Episcopalians to tell the stories. So we have stories of the bag in our e-news, which we've been doing for the last 5 years. And those stories are essentially stories of encounter with another human being where we acknowledge there are no degrees of separation. Pretty good, eh? So here's the missiological reality of which we're a part. Again, I alluded to before, virtually everything we do in this place called Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, we're doing for the first time. So we're discovering people who live in our landscape. We're discovering what this context looks like, and this is the most important part. We are, in many cases, for the first time, seeing the faces, seeing the reflection of Jesus, and hearing the stories, yearnings, and dreams of those who live up and down this valley and in the high Sierras. And so what we've come to believe, and I've been committed to the missiological church now since I've been wearing this color for the last 11 years, is that the church is here to be the church. It's not simply about attending. Attending is not going to do it. But being the church in a fulsome sense of that word means that we do this work, that we live this life, and it's about service, especially when it involves the marginalized and people who are typically invisible. And so, again, as we come to the pilgrimage of hope, we have, and I think the statistics, Jim, are around 2.8 million undocumented people in California alone. Many of those we know reside in this place where we share diocese.
Oh, yeah.
And in many cases, we either don't know them and we haven't heard their voices, or we pretend we don't know them. And we believe we have a responsibility to do the very thing I just suggested, to see their faces, to see the reflection of Jesus, to hear their stories, dreams, yearnings, and to figure out how to respond as a faith community.
This is so Francis. I can hardly
Indeed.
thank you enough to remind us that we have the same challenge.
Indeed.
One instrument of your ministry is this immigration task force. Unpack that. How does your diocese implement an immigration task force?
So before we do that, you mentioned our good friend Francis. I've been the Bishop Protector for the Third Order of the Order of St. Francis for the last 3 years. So I'm the Bishop Protector for the United States, Canada, and South America. So Francis resides quite deeply in me, and this work should reflect, him as it reflects Jesus. So the evolution of how we've come to this place is in 2017 at our diocesan convention, we had a resolution concerning the creation of an immigration task force. And I think, Jim, that was the brainchild of a number of deacons and this particular bishop saying that we need to do something. We need to do something, we need to do it yesterday. It was the first resolution, and I've been attending and presiding over conventions and at home synods for years, but it was the first time I can remember it being a unanimous resolution with standing ovation. And that was to create this task force, to invest money in the work of this task force. And again, keep in mind, we've lived in litigation for 10 years. We're not sitting on a pot of dosh here, money as we call it. So that was an extraordinary moment in time for the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin. What has emerged from that is the evolution from task force to what we now call SJ-RAISE. So SJ-RAISE is San Joaquin Refugee and Immigrant Support and Empowerment. And that particular group is calling us as a diocese through this bishop to do the very work about which I've spoken, to see the plight, the lives, the predicament of those who live up and down this valley in the high Sierras who aren't sure where they're going to be tomorrow. And so they, along with the clergy of our diocese, came up with this idea of Hikoi pilgrimage. I was saying to them at a clergy conference at the end of last year, I said, we need to go for a walk. It's time to do something. And then they very quickly said, why don't we do this? And so from the end of last year to now, that's not a long time to plan. So we've had this group doing significant work. You've mentioned Canon Anna Carmichael and Deacon Nancy Key, and there are many others who've been working really hard over the last few months getting ready for this.
Which groups have you been involved with SJ-RAISE?
Well, you mentioned Faith in the Valley, principal relationship. You mentioned the way we're walking together as Roman Catholics and Episcopalians. I think it's important to highlight here, Jim, that again, remember the silos of the past and the isolationism.
Oh, boy.
We didn't exactly have rich ecumenical relationships back in those days. At least that's my reading, but that's my sense. We're endeavoring to rectify and to address that. So those are some of our principal partners now. In addition, and this happened during our tour in 2015, is that we now have a very rich relationship with local government, with local law enforcement, with educational institutions up and down the valley. Anybody who's out there breathing, who wants to engage in a church endeavoring to make a difference and be in the world where God is, we've sought those people out.
Yeah. I really want to second the idea that with Faith in the Valley, which is something that our diocese is totally committed to, we have a grant through the CCHD that funds their ministry in part. But you're the ones actually hosting them, their offices are there. But you have a presence in Faith in the Valley that is remarkable for its leadership. So for example, there's been meetings that we've had, rallies, there's been marches, there's been meetings at the city council where your dean has started a statement of the commitment of the interfaith community regarding the rights of the homeless, the rights of the disenfranchised who live in Fresno City. It's been amazing the groups that I've seen the Episcopal community be working with. It's beyond ecumenism, it's beyond nice dialogue, it's action. Indeed. Just as what you've been saying, it's journeying with, not just praying over. So that is so clear.
Thank you, Jim. And let me hasten to sorry to interrupt you, is you've mentioned Dean Ryan a couple of times. I want to say I am delighted with our cathedral dean. And this comes from an ex-cathedral dean, so I know something about those contexts. When we discerned whether he might be the next dean of our cathedral, and there was a lot of prayer and conversation, as you might imagine, that went into that, I described to him in the deepest sense of the word what that means to be a dean in the 21st century. And a part of that is what you're describing, is how we engage with the larger context. And since the day he arrived here, he's done that exceedingly well. Yeah. So it is a pure delight.
I must admit, I've been here actually since 1988.
Couple of days.
Couple days in the same diocese working as a director. So it turns out that I will have seen the evolution of commitments and disillusion and the connection with the Episcopal Anglican community. And it's been remarkable, the growth of the positive relationship with your church. So thank you.
Well, thank you. One of the things we talk about, I typically mandate a book a year for my people. Last year it was the Book of Joy by Desmond Tutu and the Archbishop of South Africa, the Dalai Lama, I'm sorry. And in that, Tutu talks about, as he does typically, Ubuntu philosophy, which basically says, I am me because of we. And that's the theology to which we subscribe, Jim. That's what this is all about. We realize that as a diocese and as this patch of our church, the Episcopal Church, we can't be who we're called to be unless we engage in the relationships about which we speak.
Oh, yeah.
It's not only a generous heart and being courteous human beings and living in the world together, but it's from our depths, who we are at our heart, who we are in this Jesus movement as Episcopalians.
About the pilgrimage, we opened up with a little bit of a detail. It starts on the 4th, it ends on the 20th, it goes up the valley to end up in the beautiful city of Sacramento at the Capitol. But there could be detail.
Indeed.
So could you tell us about how it begins with the Eucharist, how it'll begin with a blessing at the cathedral? Walk us through the 16 days of our pilgrimage, which you are, as far as I know, pilgrimaging.
Yes, we are.
Awesome.
And I will be there every day. So let me hasten to insert here. I was confessing to someone a couple of days ago, I didn't have walking shoes until I think it was yesterday. So I went out and bought, or 2 days ago. I mean, I'm a competitive cyclist and runner, but walking's a different story. So as I indicated, I spoke with the dean yesterday, Jim, and I think that what we're going to do on the 4th and what he's putting together liturgically is a brief interfaith liturgy.
Nice.
So I think it will be a non-Eucharistic occasion, but it'll be a very rich occasion across, our traditions and even non-traditions. So that I think that's exciting. The reason that brevity is a key on that day is I think we're walking 16 miles. And I have to confess, I'm not sure our destination of day 1, but I do know it's 16 miles down the track. And so as I've indicated, there's 16 days, 16 consecutive days of walking. And I think the distances, and I typically use a K, so forgive me, I'm having to translate in my brain to miles, is it somewhere between 13 miles and 17 miles a day. The other lovely feature about this, and you mentioned one of the Catholic communities, we are being hosted by not only Episcopalians, but we're being hosted by ecumenical friends as well. Roman Catholic communities, Lutheran communities, United Methodist communities, and there's another Māori word I'll teach you. It's called manakitanga. Manakitanga means hospitality, a deep, rich manakitanga. That's what we're going to experience during these 16 days. That I would suggest is as important as the statement we're going to make in this pilgrimage of hope concerning the plight of immigrants and refugees. So again, as I suggested, we arrive in Sacramento. I think we arrive on the 18th or 19th. We're there for a night or two. We prepare for the statewide Day of the Immigrant. And then there will be gatherings at the state capitol, and we're gathering with others, again, to endeavor to have these conversations about which I spoke with legislators and lawmakers, and to see what can be the result of that.
What would be, Bishop, your main hopes, expectations, dreams for the result of what might be this accompaniment, this encounter, this pilgrimage of hope? What are some hopes?
Well, I've indicated a couple of things, but before we talk about result, I do want to add a couple of other things to what I think is equally important, and that is what happens amid this walking excursion, if you will. This is not only community building and, again, in light of our past, endeavoring to make a statement about who we think we are as a diocese. This is also about naming that we need to be a people of faith on the move, walking with Jesus as he was the itinerant Christ, as you know, asking anyone and everyone what it is I can do for you. And not to mention raising money for that. So I think that visual, that optic, if you will, is going to be exceedingly important, again, especially in light of our past. The result itself is, again, as I've indicated, I do believe that legislators and lawmakers listen when we get in their ear, especially when you have ecclesiastical leaders who have another Kiwiism. When they have mana, they have some state in this, and some, what's the word? Maybe some status in their local context, in their communities. So I'm hopeful that we will have their attention. I'm hopeful that there will be a conversation in that attention grasping, and again, as I've indicated, some difference can occur here.
How can people start to get involved with you and support this this pilgrimage of hope? How can they do this?
That's a really important question. They can go on our website. It's the Episcopal Diocese of San Joaquin, or SJ Raise, SJRAISE, and they'll see a way to contribute. You can buy merch, you can buy a t-shirt and a hat, which all goes towards not the pilgrimage itself, but supporting the aforementioned. The other part of this, Jim, and this is really important, is that we've said now for a couple of months, we believe anyone and everyone can participate in this pilgrimage, even if you can't come out and walk, even if it's a bridge too far for you for whatever reason. So we've made, and this is again available through the website, there's a booklet that's available that will have prayers that we will say about every 5 miles. So we'll stop along the way, we'll offer karakia, a Māori word for prayer, and then we'll carry on and we'll do that again 5 miles down the track. There's a series of reflections in the booklet, and there's some educative formational pieces. So what we've said to our people is that, especially people down, the high country Sierras and Ridgecrest or Kernville or Taft, and some of those folk will be walking with us, but those who can't, you can sit on your sofa or walk at home and do this and still engage in the pilgrimage of hope.
That is so practical that there is a chance a lot of people right now might not be able to even think of joining the walk. But if they could accompany you in prayer, I did go to the site this morning. I saw the hat, saw the t-shirt, saw the idea that there's a prayer booklet.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna make sure we share that information with people,
Lovely.
that they do that, and that we journey with, in spite of staying maybe at home.
Thank you.
Any final thought? We're down to 2 minutes.
As it happens.
So this is our last lap for someone who is a cyclist and a runner. What might it be in the last 2 minutes you want to tell us? Now, you have been definitely reminding us with all these Maui words from your country of origin, from New Zealand. Anything you want to say about, you got a minute and a half, Bishop. What would you like to do to conclude?
I better get my skates on, eh? Firstly, about the pilgrimage, before I say something about Aotearoa, New Zealand in particular, our home in Christchurch. A couple of people have said over the last few months, Bishop, this is politicizing. This is, talking about positions of the U.S. government, and in particular someone with the name of Donald Trump, to which I say very, very quickly, this is not about red or blue.
No.
This is about Jesus.
Yeah.
This is about naming who Jesus was, is, and will always be, therefore who we're called to be. So I want to be abundantly clear about that. And I know there's an amen from you on that one.
Definitely, it's so important to say that. This is a pilgrimage.
Indeed it is. So it's a sacred event. So, Jim, Christchurch, New Zealand, which is on what we call the mainland, the east coast of the South Island, it was my first diocese as an Anglican priest in the Anglican Church of Aotearoa, New Zealand and Polynesia. It is the diocese where our now 26 and 24-year-olds went to primary school. Wow. It is the place where I was ordained a deacon and a priest. It is the place where our house is located, which is, by the way, an old church, which we've renovated into our holiday house and will retire there. When that massacre occurred and I was at a House of Bishops meeting on the East Coast, I was shattered by it and spent the entire evening contacting people just to make sure they were okay. Wow. Very quickly I'll say, because I know we're running out of time, what I'll say about New Zealand, it is not a semi-automatic culture. What happened was bizarre for that people and that culture. And lastly, I was delighted the way the Prime Minister Jacinda has dealt with this, responded to it from the heart of a leader, and I think that is the model and example of what it means to lead a country.
Thank you, Bishop, for leading your diocese on this pilgrimage. We look forward to another program with you in the near future.
Thank you, Jim.
God bless.
Bless you.